Welcome to an interview in history. Imagine a podcast that serves as a bridge across time, connecting listeners to the voices of history's most impactful figures. Each episode is a deep dive into the lives and legacies of these individuals, exploring not just their well-documented achievements, but also uncovering lesser-known facts that shaped their contributions to our world. From scientists who unlocked the mysteries of the universe to activists who fought for social change, each story is a testament to the indelible mark they left on society. This journey through history will not only educate, but also inspire listeners to appreciate the intricate tapestry of human progress. I'm your host, Steve Burig, and this week we'll be talking with Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp, who was an American lawman in the American West, including Dodge City, Deadwood, and Tombstone. Earp was involved in the gunfight at the OK Corral, during which lawmen killed 3 outlaw Cochise County cowboys. This interview takes place on January 8th, 1928. I am so excited to have this chance to talk with you. You're such a legend. So thank you for joining me today, Mr. Earp.
Let me stop you. Call me Wyatt, not Mr. Earp. I just don't like that.
Okay, you got it, Wyatt. Let's start at the very beginning. Can you tell us about your childhood?
Well, I was born on March 19th, 1848 in Monmouth, Illinois. My parents, Nicholas and Virginia, were hard-working folks. My father was a farmer and later a justice of the peace. Life wasn't easy. We moved around a lot as my father sought better opportunities. I had 7 siblings, and growing up with such a large family taught me about loyalty and sticking together.
Can you tell us a little more about your siblings?
Certainly. I had 4 brothers, Newton, James, Virgil, and Morgan, and 3 sisters, Martha, Virginia, and Adela. My brothers and I were particularly close, especially Virgil and Morgan. We supported each other through thick and thin. You know, of course, that Virgil, Morgan, and I stood side by side during the gunfight at the OK Corral.
So what about your schooling? Did you have much of a formal education?
Not much, to be honest. With all the moving around, my education was pretty patchy. I learned the basics, but most of what I know came from experience. Life itself was my greatest teacher.
Then before becoming a sheriff, what kind of work did you do?
Oh, I did a bit of everything. I worked as a teamster, hauled goods across the plains. For a while I was a buffalo hunter. I even tried my hand at being a saloon keeper and gambler. You could say I wandered some before finding my calling in law enforcement.
How did you become a sheriff?
My first real stint in law enforcement was as a constable at Lamar, Missouri. Later, I worked as a deputy marshal in Dodge City, Kansas. Those towns were rough, filled with cowboys looking to blow off steam. I suppose I had a knack for keeping order without drawing too much blood, which earned me a reputation.
Let's talk about your relationships. Did you ever marry or have children?
I married my first wife, Urella Sutherland, in 1870, but sadly she died of typhoid fever just a year later. I went through a downward spiral after Urella's death, and I had a series of legal problems. On March of 1871, Barton County filed a lawsuit against me in the amount of $200 in my sureties, which included my father. I was in charge of collecting license fees Lamar, which were designated to fund local schools, but had failed to turn the money over to the county. After that, I had a few relationships, but it wasn't until I met Josephine Marcus that I found someone to share my life with. Josephine and I never had any children, but she's always been my partner.
The gunfight at the OK Corral is what you're most famous for. Can you walk us through that day?
That was October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona. It was a culmination of tensions between my brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Clanton-McLowry gang. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the dust settled, 3 of them were dead, and the law was upheld. It wasn't something I gloried in. Violence is a last resort, but sometimes it's necessary. Wyatt, you talked about the OK Corral and how quickly it was over. But tell me, what was the fight all about? The gunfight at OK Corral wasn't just about what happened on October 26, 1881. It was the result of a long brewing feud between my brothers, Doc Holliday, and the outlaw group led by the Clantons and McLowrys. Tombstone was a town teetering on the edge of lawlessness. The Clantons and McLowrys were part of what folk called the cowboy element, often targeting ranchers and business folks trying to make an honest living. As lawmen, my brothers Virgil, Morgan, and I were sworn to uphold the peace, and that put us squarely in their sights. The fight itself was sparked by threats. The night before, Clanton and Tom McLowry were making drunken claims about how they'd kill us if we got in their way. That morning, Virgil, as marshal, ordered Ike to leave town after disarming him, but the Clantons and McLowrys didn't back down. They gathered weapons and waited near the corral, daring us to confront them. When we approached them, Virgil, Morgan, Doc Holliday, and I, we were acting on Virgil's authority to disarm them. We didn't go there to start a fight, but we weren't about to let them gun us down either. The exchange was short but deadly. It was chaos, gunfire, shouting, smoke. When it ended, Billy Clanton and Tom and Frank McLowry were dead. Virgil and Morgan were wounded, and Doc Holliday had a grazed hip. Somehow I came out unscathed. People called it a gunfight, but to me it was an ambush waiting to happen. We had no choice but to stand our ground and protect ourselves. It wasn't about glory or revenge. It was about survival and upholding the law. That day, we sent a message that lawlessness wouldn't be tolerated, but it came at a heavy price. Would you do OK Corral over again if you had the chance? For my handling of the situation at Tombstone, I have no regrets. Were it to be done over again, I would do exactly as I did at that time. If the outlaws and their friends and allies imagined that they could intimidate or exterminate the Earps by a process of murder and then hide behind alibis and the technicalities of the law, they simply missed their guess. I want to call your particular attention again to one fact, which writers of Tombstone incidents and history apparently have overlooked, with the deaths of the McLowrys and the Clantons, Stillwell, Florentino Cruz, and Curly Bill and the rest. Organized, politically protected crime and depredations in Cochise County ceased. Now let's talk about your brothers and if they're still alive. My brothers. As I mentioned, we were a close-knit bunch. There were 5 of us boys in total: Newton, James, Virgil, Morgan, and myself. Each of them played an important role in my life. Newton, my eldest half-brother, is still alive. He didn't often get involved in the more dangerous parts of our lives. He preferred to stay out of the spotlight. James, my next older brother, is also still alive, though he's lived a quieter life after his time in the Civil War. Virgil, who was more like a father figure to me growing up, passed away in 1905. He was a good man, a real lawman through and through. He was with me during the events at the OK Corral and suffered greatly afterwards. The Clanton gang shot him in the arm in retaliation, and he was never the same physically, though he kept his fighting spirit. Morgan, God rest his soul, was killed in 1882, not long after the OK Corral. He was shot in the back while playing billiards in Tombstone. That loss hit me hard. I vowed to bring his killers to justice, and I saw that through. We've all faced our shares of hardship, but I'll always carry my brothers with me, whether they're here or gone. Family is everything, and the memories guide me every day. Okay, Wyatt. Now tell me about your relationship with Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday. Now there's a man who's been both praised and vilified in equal measure. My relationship with Doc was complicated, but built on mutual respect and trust. He wasn't an easy man to get close to, but when Doc considered you a friend, he was loyal to a fault. We first met in Dodge City, Kansas. At the time, I was working as a deputy marshal, and Doc had already earned a reputation as a gambler and gunslinger. He was sharp, quick with his wit and his pistols, but he was also suffering terribly from tuberculosis. Despite his illness, he carried himself with a kind of defiant strength that I admired. Our friendship deepened when we both ended up in Tombstone, Arizona. Doc had my back when I needed him most, especially during the tensions with the Clantons and McLaury gang. He wasn't a lawman, but he stood with us at the OK Corral because he believed in loyalty and justice, or maybe he just wanted to settle a few scores of his own. Either way, I was glad to have him there. Doc wasn't a saint, not by any stretch. He had a fiery temper and could be ruthless when provoked. But beneath that rough exterior, he had a code of honor. He never betrayed a friend, and he was willing to risk everything for those he cared about. I think a lot of people misunderstood Doc. Yes, he was a gambler, a drinker, and a fighter, but he was also fiercely intelligent and had a dry sense of humor that could catch you off guard. I owed him my life more than once, and I tried to repay that debt by standing by him as his health declined. In the end, Doc died in a sanatorium in Colorado, far from the action and adventure he'd been drawn to all his life. It's a sad thing to think about, but I take comfort in knowing he lived on his own terms. He was my friend, and I'll always be grateful for the bond we shared. After your time as a lawman, what was your life like? I moved around a lot. Josephine and I tried mining for a while, and I ran saloons in California and Alaska. I even worked as a consultant for Hollywood movies later in life. I never really settled down in one place for too long, but I always found a way to keep busy. It's interesting you brought up working in the movies. Tell me about that. While I was living in Los Angeles, I became an unpaid film consultant for several silent cowboy movies. In 1915, I visited the set of director Alan Dwan's movie The Half-Breed, starring Douglas Fairbanks. As was the custom in those days, I was invited to join the party and mingle with our background action. I also became friends with William S. Hart and later Tom Mix, the two most famous movie cowboys of their era. Hart was a stickler for realism in his depictions of Western life, and he relied on me for advice. I frequently visited the sets of movie director John Ford, whose movies starred Harry Carey. In 1916, I went with my friend Jack London to visit the set of former cowboy, sailor, and movie actor turned film director Raoul Walsh, who was shooting at the studio Mutual Film Conglomerate in Edendale, California. Walsh took us to dinner at Al Levy's Cafe on Main and 3rd Street. During the meal, the highest-paid entertainer in the world, Charlie Chaplin, dropped by to greet me. Chaplin was impressed with us, but it seems with particularly the former Tombstone marshal. I tried to persuade my good friend, well-known cowboy movie star William S. Hart, to help set the record straight about my life and get a movie made. If the story were exploited on the screen by Hart, it would do much towards setting me right before a public which has always been fed lies about me. Looking back, how do you feel about the life you've led? Well, I've done my best to stand by my principles: justice, loyalty, and family. My life has been full of challenges, but I wouldn't change much. If folks remember me as a man who did what was right, even when it wasn't easy, then I'll be satisfied. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Wyatt.
My pleasure.
Wyatt Earp was the last surviving Earp brother and the last surviving participant of the gunfight at OK Corral when he died at home in the Earp small rented bungalow in Los Angeles of chronic cystis on January 13, 1929, at the age of 80. The Los Angeles Times reported that he had been ill with liver disease for 3 years. His brother Newton had died almost a month prior on December 18, 1928. Wyatt was survived by Josephine and sister Adela Earp Edwards. He had no children. His wife Josephine was apparently too grief-stricken to attend the funeral. The funeral was held at the Congregational Church on Wilshire Boulevard. Earp's pallbearers were William J. Hunsaker, Earp's attorney in Tombstone and noted Los Angeles attorney, Jim Mitchell, Los Angeles Examiner reporter and Hollywood screenwriter, George W. Parsons, founding member of Tombstone's Committee of Vigilance, Wilson Meisner, a friend of Wyatt's during the Klondike Gold Rush, John Clume, a good friend from his days in Tombstone, former Tombstone mayor and editor of the Tombstone Epitaph, William S. Hart, good friend and Western actor and silent film star Tom Mix, friend and Western film star. The newspapers reported that Tom Mix cried during his friend's service. And now, another forgotten history. Located in southwest Kansas, legendary Dodge City sits on the banks of the Arkansas River and atop the world's largest underground water table, the Ogallala Aquifer. The surrounding red hills are a source of bountiful wildlife. Fort Dodge was built in 1865 to protect the wagon trains and U.S. mail and supply troops for the Indian Wars. The wickedest little city in the West was officially born in 1872, growing up around the sod home of a local cattle rancher. Dodge City was a major stop along the historic Santa Fe Trail. The great wagon train and trade route between Franklin, Missouri and Santa Fe, New Mexico, used until 1880. This prairie town was also the buffalo capital of the U.S. for 3 years until massive slaughters wiped out the herds. For a decade, ending in the mid-1880s, the town was a major destination for cattle drives. With so many drifters, buffalo hunters, ex-soldiers, and gunslingers converging on the town, Dodge City became legendary for its lawlessness. With a population of only 1,200 in 1876, Dodge boasted 19 liquor-serving establishments. Famous Kansas peacekeepers did make it into town eventually, including Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp, bringing the long arm of the law and plenty of fodder for old Western stories of glory. Today, Dodge City thrives with tourism, based on the mystique of the cowboy and the legends of the Old West. Join us next week when we visit with Elisha Otis of the Otis Elevator Company. He was quite an inventor. Until then, take care.